My name's Mel Slade. I'm from the International Energy Agency and responsible for putting the conference together. And when we've been thinking about how to frame the conference this year, and because we found ourselves, of course, in this unprecedented energy crisis, we decided we'd like to focus on the immediate term. What can governments and the private sector do together to shelter consumers and small businesses from energy shocks? And then also, how can energy efficiency be used to build long-term resilience? And so these two panels this afternoon will start with sheltering shocks, so the immediate term, and then we'll go into another panel which will be on the resilience. So with that, we'll start our panel here. And I will introduce everybody to you. So we have our colleague from the Netherlands, Vice Minister Hedra, and sorry if I don't pronounce your name very well. And then we have His Excellency, the Deputy Minister from Ghana, His Excellency Gyan Mensah. And then we have His Excellency Kevin Hunter from Barbados, Mary Spray-Green of Oracle, and Christine Egan from CLASP. Now, we've put this panel together in a very conscious way to try and get a conversation going about what governments are doing, what technology can do, and also the role of a very experienced practitioner in the NGO sector who's been working for years helping consumers in various parts of the world in Christine Egan and CLASP. So, like I say, very, very deliberate choice of people here. And what we're going to do is ask a sort of leading question of each of our panellists and ask them to show what they've been doing from their various lenses in this context of the short term. And then after that, we might have a chance. And if I could ask the panel, when you're listening to your fellow panellists speak, if anything occurs to you you'd like to ask each other, we'll try and make some time for that towards the end. So I'm going to start with the Netherlands, if I may, and just, from a government perspective, having, not long been through a similar crisis in 22, what sort of energy efficiency related actions have you been able to take to shelter people from the short term? And have you chosen those because of things you've learned in the recent past?
No. Indeed, a very good question. And the policies that you take are always additional policies because there's already a policy framework in place. We have long-term policies to move to more energy efficiency. So landlords are not allowed to rent out houses with bad energy labels, otherwise their rents go down. We forbid electric cars or the sale of non-electric cars beyond a certain date. So all these policies are already in place. But what do you do when an energy shock happens? And the most natural thing is to lower energy prices for consumers, lower VAT, lower excise taxes, lower the other types of electricity taxes. But that is what we did not do. We did not lower a single tax. And the reason is, if you lower taxes in a period when there's already an enormous energy shock, so there's less fuel available, you basically increase demand. So we didn't do that. What we did is we offered installation programs, quick installation programs to households. We did trade-in schemes where people could bring their old fossil cars and swap it for a second-hand, not a new, but a second-hand electric car. And for the most vulnerable households, we gave them a little bit of money when they showed us they were in a vulnerable group. So then the agency remained with them. They could use it to buy more energy, but they could also use it for different purposes. So the energy saving was still there. They could use their money in that way. And if they came forward to us, they immediately got other advice and they were referred to an installation program. So this was kind of a mixture of measures that we tried to do to make it temporary, targeted, and ultimately transformative, the energy measures that we took.
That's a nice set of words, temporarily, transformative and targeted. We're seeing a lot of untargeted policy out there at the moment, and a lot of policy that's going to drive energy demand up. So kudos to you for spotting those opportunities. And so maybe I could go to Ghana now and ask what you think the role of energy efficiency is in your context of to help address supply shocks in a country where people just don't have enough energy already, and access has been a challenge over time. People struggle to pay bills, perhaps. What can you do with energy efficiency to help you in that situation?
Thank you very much. In our perspective, we see energy efficiency as helping consumers to be able to achieve the same or more output with less energy. And in this perspective, we believe that conservation is key, and you have to complement it with behavioral and then also technology tools like innovative tools. So in this case, once this is set, anytime there are shocks, consumers are able to quickly adapt within the short time. And I used this example recently with the happenings in the Strait of Hormuz. We realized that not on power, but on petroleum, for instance, government quickly has to intervene by reducing, taking some taxes or levies out. But when it came to the power generation itself, quickly, I think the adaptation of utilizing efficient gas usage, for instance, was able to hold us, because we then didn't need the liquid fuels that would have depended on coming from maybe the Asians or something to power plants. But beyond this, we believe that as a government, energy efficiency is just beyond just protecting the consumers. We believe that it is about energy security, and we also believe that energy efficiency is also about fairness. So what steps government will put in place to ensure the households and businesses achieve that fairness is what we are putting in place. One of it is we are looking at what kind of fuel that we are using for our generation, which is more cost effective. And that is why we adapt the usage of gas to power. We have seen that gas to power is relatively cheaper as compared to using the liquid fuels. We also have seen something about transmission distribution losses, which also brings these losses and inefficiencies are put on the consumers. So mechanisms that we put in place to make sure that we reduce these losses, that the consumers do not bear this as a cost. So anytime that there are shocks, external shocks, the consumers are not able to take up additional costs to them. And we're also working on the demand side, that is the energy, the demand side. So making sure that there's much more education to prep consumers to make sure that they utilize what is needed so they don't also pay so much. So anytime that there are shocks, external shocks with outside, with this preparedness, consumers are able to hold themselves in. However, government also put in place some immediate steps, which I can say that is not sustainable, as we did. If government says it wants to subsidize for power, that is not sustainable. But when government looks at efficient or more cost-effective way of generating, like relying on the REs, renewable energy sources, like solar. Currently, we have done the solar ocean for the battery energy storage as well. And we are using a competitive procurement process so that we get the power at a relatively cheaper price so that the consumer can also bear it. So these are some of the measures government is putting in place to make sure that consumers do not overly take up additional costs when there are external shocks outside. So we are more dependent on local usage of our resources, like using our local production of oil and then also using our local production of gas to support our power generation. And this, I think, has been very efficient for our consumers.
Thank you. Very interesting points. Maybe I could go to Secretary Hunt, please. We've heard a lot about Barbados's demand-side measures and the success you've had. What lessons would you like to share with other countries on your recent experience?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening to the panel and everyone watching. Barbados has had, and is still having, a very unique experience from our perspective. 90% of our electricity is generated from imported fossil fuels. And so you can imagine the tremendous strain and drain on our resources that that would have. In addition, we have the fuel adjustment clause, which would see the pass-through of any price variances immediately onto our customers and our consumers and their electricity bills. So the recent crisis has really provided for us not only a challenge, but I think an opportunity for us to really turn things around and add on the energy efficiency and energy conservation methods and policies that we've already implemented. So what do I mean? Well, unlike Netherlands, one of the things that we've done immediately, notwithstanding that it is not a viable long-term solution and it was never intended to be, government has sought to shelter the pass-through effect at the pump. And the transportation sector has been, or is, the second largest consumer of resources within Barbados. And so we've sought to put a hedge and cap both diesel and gasoline, the latter being capped at around $4.01 per liter, as opposed to the full pass-through of $4.70 and beyond. And while we know that that is not sustainable, that has been done to buy us some time to accomplish a couple of things. First, our approach has been our Prime Minister, the Honourable Mayor Moore-Motley, and our Senior Minister, the Honourable Kerry Simmons, who's head of the energy sector. They have taken the perspective that this is now a matter of national security. And so because the government is seeing it as one of national security, against that framework, we've brought together every single possible player in the energy sector. The utility, we only have one utility on island, the regulator, the government, interveners, installers, attorneys, so as to fix all of the issues in our energy sector, whether it be regulatory, technical, legal, etc. And that is because we have a new target, and that target is to have 50% renewables onboarded onto our grid by the end of next year. So Barbados is in a massive push right now to be able to accomplish that. And to accomplish that, we need to have BESS onto our grid so as to stabilize the grid, also to unlock current projects that have been stalled, but then also to expand. So that's on one track. A parallel track to that is that we have already been working with institutions such as the IDB, etc., and we have rolled out several initiatives. For example, we've replaced approximately 88% of our street lights with LED bulbs. We are now embarking on a plan to replace those with smart LED bulbs so as to help reduce that demand and reduce that consumption. We have implemented policies that are aimed and targeted at not only small businesses and micro businesses in terms of incentives for them to pursue energy efficiency and energy conservation methods in their business practices, but we've also sought to cushion the impact upon the vulnerable among us, where we've seen a project where we've distributed well in excess of 11,000 LED bulbs to individual homeowners free of cost. We've also taken the step to completely electrify our public transportation bus fleet. And while we're not at 100%, we're well past 80%. And very shortly, we will be taking to Cabinet a cabinet paper that maps out a fuller, more extensive energy efficiency and energy conservation plan. And so we have those two things running in parallel, so that the aim is by the end of next year to, one, have 50% renewables onto our grid, two, as we engage in a massive public awareness, public campaign and rollout of our plan, to be able to educate our populace, inclusive of individuals and businesses, as to the need for them to take advantage of the various incentives that we have, whether it ranges from refrigeration to reduction in taxes in the acquisition of EVs, and there are a number of different policies that we've put in place to all work together to help achieve this energy security that we so desperately need.
Thank you. So you've described something that those of us who work in energy efficiency often come up against, the fact that energy efficiency, unfortunately, is quite complicated. And you talked about all of the stakeholders you need to work with. And I think that's something that governments around the world have observed. You know, you need to get those groups of people together to get them to act in concert, to understand what they each need to achieve in when you're setting up a policy to make it successful. So a great example of that. In terms of your short-term measures, where you've been trying to relieve the sort of increases in prices, have you been trying to target those measures at all, or are they broad-based across the community?
They're broad-based across the community. Yeah.
And for technical reasons, because it's hard to reach the more vulnerable households, or because you felt everybody feels the high prices, so everybody should be more or less compensated?
Correct, the latter. So we know that everyone feels the high prices, particularly at the pump. So that hedging is as it relates to gasoline and diesel only, whereas the other measures that I would have briefly referred to are across the board. As it relates to the more vulnerable, as I said, we've distributed free of cost LED bulbs to households. We are incentivizing persons in terms of refrigeration. We want to put standards in place and educate the public so that they know these are the types of appliances that you should be purchasing. So we have a cross-sectoral approach.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we'll come back to some of that in a minute.
That's
I'd like to go to Mary, if I may now. Now, Mary, we do a lot of training, capacity building for energy efficiency at the IEA, and one of the sort of segments we always do is on communications. Mm-hmm. And I use some old O-Power experience when doing that, because I find it tells a fantastic story about how you can influence consumers. And we see other things like, rooftop solar and things. It's much easier to persuade people to do those sorts of things. It's much easier to have this kind of peer pressure happening, whereas with energy efficiency that's much more difficult. But you've been experimenting with these opportunities through digital tools and techniques. So could you tell us a bit more about the evolution of that and what you think is coming next?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, let me thank you for incorporating technology into this conversation, because I think what it really can achieve in this circumstance is scale. Digital channels are a way to reach people in a way that some of the traditional approaches, which we often see, community and in-person based or broad-based campaigns that we've heard about, and I know the IEA has done a tremendous amount of support and enablement around them, but digital personalized solutions, leveraging data, I think are really quite untapped. And we find that especially in the space of trying to engage and enroll vulnerable populations into energy efficiency and energy assistance programs. And that's not to say that they're not, digital solutions do not take the place of everything else that is happening today. Digital solutions are a way to amplify either broad-based campaigns or in-person and community-based engagement. And those community-based programs are incredibly important because of the trust that local organizations can bring to people. Trust is very important when an individual is considering assistance or entering any kind of program. And what we have found is energy suppliers or utilities are really best positioned to do this because they already have very rich customer data. And the first step is using that data to better understand and identify the households that are struggling the most, especially if you are in a situation where you need to target resources. And what we've done is we combine energy usage patterns that comes from the meter data from a household with other available data sets like census data, if a nation uses that, housing characteristics. And these data sources combined create a much more complete picture of customer vulnerability. The next step then, of course, is you've identified the most vulnerable households, and then the next step is proactive, personalized engagement. So instead of sending the general communications, a utility is capable of notifying a customer when they're on track for a high bill, or ahead of a season of particularly high usage, or even moments where eligibility changes, program enrollment is opening. And I love that you mentioned O-Power and the behavioral science aspect, is we're applying that still today. And in this case, it's using social proof, helping an individual see that their neighbors are also struggling. Applying for assistance is not unusual. 400 of your closest neighbors have done the same. And then if ease of enrollment is the goal, technology has lots of venues depending on the population. I mean, there's text. Almost everyone has a mobile device. There's email, web, video. We even often will use phone call, automated phone call to households to direct customers to a digital one-stop shop that can determine eligibility, recommend the most relevant assistance and energy efficiency programs. And I'll just close with one example of this in practice, where we partnered with, in the United States, with National Grid to identify likely eligible and likely vulnerable energy customers. We engaged with them in this very personalized, proactive way. And the customers that engaged with the digital tools, they were twice as likely to enroll in the energy assistance programs than those who did not. And so these personalized digital solutions, they're not the answer to what we're talking about today, but I think they're a really underutilized tool that has a lot more that it can do.
Thank you. Yeah. And you've based this on decades now of experience and data, and ways of synthesizing data and new data sets and things. What do you think's around the corner?
Can you say that again?
What's around the corner? What's next?
I am really interested in, so you mentioned using data, how we've leveraged it. It's machine learning on vast amounts of data, and 175 utilities around the world ingesting trillions of data points. And machine learning is fantastic, and these insights that we can provide are wonderful. But I think what is exciting is the predictive components. How can we, ahead of someone reaching a moment of vulnerability, how can we catch them before they get there? How can we create an intervention? Some of you may have heard my joke about how if your HVAC system breaks if you're in a cold climate in the middle of winter or in a hot climate in the middle of summer, you are not thinking about what the most efficient, sustainable solution is for you. How can we use data and AI to get ahead of that, predict failure, and have interventions before you reach that moment of crisis? Because I'll tell you what I did, and we replaced our system because it was freezing. So that's what I'm excited for, and I really hope that data and data access can be a universal kind of tool that can be used really anywhere.
Very interesting. And of course, we've seen a lot more of that happening at an industrial level. So seeing how that can now be brought perhaps to a household level would be extremely interesting.
Exactly. Households at scale. It's impressive.
It's impressive. Christine, I'm sure a lot of this is music to your ears, clearly. And you also have decades of experience of trying to support governments with policy to improve the efficiency of appliances, which in turn always improve people's lives, but they can do that at a cost or less of a cost, depending on the choices that are made. So how would you like to kind of contribute to this debate?
Yeah, it certainly is music to my ears. I actually started my career working on the consumer side and helping people be informed, make decisions, and understand their use. And so, and then moved more to the supporting governments with policy and regulation side. But I think it's really important to bring, for those of us in rooms like this, to bring the two together. So for those of us who work on energy at the policy level, I think we sometimes can forget that consumers do not experience energy as kilowatt hours or gigawatts or barrels of oil, right? What they experience energy as is whether or not they can run the air conditioner affordably in a heat crisis. Many of us were probably in London Climate Week last week. It was hot, actually, right? And the buildings with cooling were the most packed sessions. So you can immediately make a connection, right, to the comfort of individuals and to the affordability. It's the decision of whether or not for a family event and a big cooking moment, we can afford to, do the extra running of the gas stove because natural gas prices are so high. And so I always like to place the work that we do to support governments in the context of those individual consumers, because as we work across there's about 50 countries where CLASP works, and the story is the same, which is that it's the households and also the small businesses, which is the economic mobility engine of all of our economies. It's those households, those that can least afford to pay relative to the income that they have, that are often using the least efficient equipment. And so in this context, we talk about energy efficiency as climate mitigation. Right now, it's a really key moment to talk about energy efficiency as energy security. I also want us all to remember that it's also consumer protection. It's an affordability policy. This is why in this moment, as we do our work with governments, we are encouraging direct subsidy and support to the most vulnerable, really targeting and identifying either through digital tools, but really thinking about the fact that the burden is falling inequitably, and adapting to and adjusting to and incorporating that. But we're also talking to governments about not missing the long-term view in this moment of crisis. This is the time to build for the next crisis. We, frankly, if you think about the last decade, between a warming planet and our geopolitical realities, it seems the next crisis is really always around the corner. And these, oh my goodness, events are happening with actually great frequency. And so you can almost guarantee, right, that there will be a next heat crisis, that there will be a next moment. And so we are really encouraging folks, even in countries, I thought Fatih was right on point earlier, noting the critical nature of air conditioning. Incredibly low penetration rates around the world of air conditioning in places like Brazil and India. You're talking single digits to low double digits in terms of the penetration rate. When it is 105 degrees Fahrenheit, you have to anticipate. It is a matter of human rights, actually, that people will want these purchases and will want air conditioners and cooling. And so if you start from the assumption that people actually require cooling, well, now we have a different problem to solve, and we absolutely have to build energy efficiency. And I would note that standards are a tool, minimum energy performance standards, that we promote broadly. It's very difficult, as Fatih said, to send the signal through prices to individual consumers, but also to put that decision on the backs of individuals who are making a lot of competing decisions in the moment, in their family and in their lives. It really needs to be built in on a regulatory basis. And even in some of the most efficient economies, those air conditioner standards can vary between 40 to 75% from the most efficient product to the least efficient product on the market. It's time to actually double down to close those gaps, to go for ambition, to live up to our doubling energy efficiency commitments, if that's what we're talking about in the COP frame, and really essentially change the underlying vulnerabilities in the future, broadly, but also for the world's most vulnerable. And so that's how we like to think of the problem at CLASP and our partnership and our encouragement to government leaders.
Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome.
And you're covering there both the short-term need and what we can do for the long term, which is what we want to spend the whole of the next few days really talking about. So thanks for that emphasis. You talked about encouraging governments to go for the direct support because there is such a severe problem for certain members of society, I suppose, at the moment, some certain vulnerable households. What do you say to the people who say that just encourages them to use more energy?
I mean, I'm a bit of a skeptic of this argument. When you talk about many of the world's most vulnerable, the levels of energy consumption that we're talking about are incredibly small. You could double, triple, quadruple, and not get to what my household uses in a day, in a year, right? So I think we really, when we're really talking about the world's most vulnerable and targeting to those worlds, I think it's a bit of a misrepresentation, right? To say that as if everyone's consumption is equal, right? And that everyone's just going to skyrocket. We do a lot of work actually in the energy access sector of actually promoting the idea that folks are entitled to a minimum energy consumption level for a life. There is almost no country in the world, you just simply, if you see GDP per capita, it correlates to productivity, wealth, and quality of life. And so we often, again, promote that perspective. But I would say that there are important ways that you need to make those subsidy programs rational, appropriate, targeted, and ensure that they don't disrupt, and that they're actually tackling barriers for those low-income consumers. One of the programs that jumps to my mind is the UK Warm Homes program, which is targeting those who live in social housing and who actually do not have the ability to make purchase decisions because they are renters. They're tackling the renter divide, but they're who's paying the bills, right? They're paying the bills for that, for the equipment that gets installed. And so they're actually targeting the customers where they will get a direct economic benefit, and they're building a more sustainable electrified approach, tackling both heating and electric cooking. And so giving also, in this case, a cleaner home environment, less indoor air pollution, and again, improving health and quality of life for the most vulnerable population. So I guess my answer is one, let's be realistic about the distribution of energy consumption and think about it in that way, but also target the programs and structure them in such a way that they're appropriate and not likely to disrupt markets, while recognizing that energy efficiency and the regulation of energy efficiency is necessary because it's invisible and it's a market failure. We won't, if we could get there, simply via those forces, it would be done by now, right? None of us would be on this stage, and we wouldn't be having the event. So let's be realistic about the problem we're tackling.
Thank you. Perhaps I could go back to Ghana, and what are your views on the debate between supporting the most vulnerable with immediate price relief and targeting to make sure that your public budget is being used most effectively? So how do you weigh up that balance?
Thank you very much. Before answering this, I must say that Ghana, in the last decade, we've experienced two global shocks. One is the Russia-Ukraine war with COVID, and then the most recent one, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And in these two instances, how governments have actually reacted to these two instances, the shocks that it brings into the sector, the energy sector. In the first instance, you could see that the government was a bit ill-prepared for it, so we actually caught off guard. All of a sudden, prices of petroleum products actually skyrocketed. We went as much as almost about $2.3 per liter. In the same vein, what we experienced recently, we realized that even though the prices was going up it was not actually going, the price at the pump was not going up astronomically as compared to the previous year. This because of the policies the government put in place. One of it was having a very resilient local currency to hold the gap, and then also the quick utilization of local production of oil within Ghana also helped us to be able to cushion the additional costs that ordinarily the government would have incurred. But back to the question, in Ghana we have a system we call it the Energy Sector Recovery Program, where in the past we have accumulated a lot of costs on energy distribution and energy consumption, because in the past some government institutions which are on postpaid meters were not paying us within time. Also, we have some individuals using power without paying. Then also within the COVID period, government actually subsidized the electricity cost for every household. So not only the vulnerable, but so all this costs was there. And this is what currently government has done, is that quickly they have introduced some kind of a tax, because one, already petroleum prices are low, so just to cushion and to be able to pay the outstanding debt. We've also had discussions with IPPs where they have agreed and also given some kind of haircut on how much accumulated debt that government owes them. But that is because the government also made proactive steps to be able to clear all outstanding and giving some timelines to make sure that all debts are cleared. With this taken out, government is now putting in place measures that we pay cost-reflective tariffs. And for us to be able to pay cost-reflective tariff and also make sure that the consumer is not overburdened, whether a vulnerable class or a higher class, is just to make sure that the cost of the electricity generation or the energy generation itself should be reasonable, that everybody will be able to take it up. Beyond that, we have very extreme cases where we've had some support from donor countries, where we have the mini grids for rural areas, and then we have also the solar rooftop project the government is undertaking also to help sustain some rural areas who cannot pay much more cost reflective. But adding to that, our tariff system is also progressive. So the progressive tariff helps us to also manage efficiency. So if you know you are within the vulnerable stage, you cannot consume power to some extent where you cannot afford it. So we have the band for the vulnerable stage. Beyond that, the tariff keeps increasing. So that in itself is more or less a way to check over consumption. But however, government also quickly have to look at industries so that those cost-effective tariff does not also adversely affect industries. So there are some discussions in some industries, like those in the steel industry, have some tax incentives that is given in terms of the power generation side. So generally, I must say that we are looking at the costs, how well we'll be able to minimize the cost of generation so that it will translate into a more cost-effective tariff. And that is why we are looking at all sorts of relatively cheaper sources. One is currently we are doing more of the renewables. Our target is that by 2030 we should be able to achieve no less than 10% of our generation mix from renewables. However, in Ghana we do almost about 20% of our power generation from the hydro. But when we are talking about renewables, we don't add it because once we add the hydro to it, we feel we've achieved quite significant steps in the renewables. So we always discount it so that we can focus on other conventional renewable sources like solar, wind, and then also even with nuclear, which currently the government is aggressively pursuing the nuclear processes. And this are all just to make sure that we get the energy needed at a relatively cheaper price. And then also to add, Ghana currently, I can say, is amongst one of the countries within the sub-region with a higher electricity access. Currently, we are doing almost about 90% of electricity access And beyond that too, when it comes to even EVs, Ghana is also one of the leading countries with the higher number of EVs. So we see that demand from the EV, demand from data centers coming up is obviously going to shoot up our demand. So quickly we have to put in more effective generation mix to be able to meet the rising demands, or supplies to meet the rising demands. And that is why we are considering aggressively other renewable sources like the solar is what currently we are pushing, solar backed with a battery energy storage system. And then we have also had some investors coming in with wind. We are currently having mounted any of them, but we've made some progress. And finally is the pursuit for nuclear energy to support our generation mix. So by and large, I must say that our focus more is to deliver the energy, but at a relatively cost-effective rate. And that is what the government is pursuing.
Thank you. Maybe I could go back to the Netherlands. And if you reflect on what Mary's points about digital tools and how you've seen them evolve in the Netherlands over the years, what do they enable you to do now that you couldn't do 5 years ago?
Yep. No, indeed, I really like Mary's comments. A lot of different aspects are worth consideration. I mean, having the data is extremely important to know who are the vulnerable households. So what we do is we combine the data of the energy corporations together with the other statistical data on income levels, on educational levels, on health data, with the microdata. And that's available for researchers. Of course, you cannot tap into that as a government official and say, hey, because for privacy concerns, but at least you get an idea, what are the neighborhoods where there are vulnerable households? And well, Christine was already also saying that the additional benefits that you have from energy policies like cleaner air, but also children that are less often sick when they're in a better insulated home, better educational performance, and you can actually get that when you exchange the data and really target government policies where they're needed most and work together with local policies. Because there was also what Mary was saying. I mean, you can get that far with digital solutions, with data, but ultimately you need somebody on the ground to reach the vulnerable households. You need to know where to target and who to target. And when you do that, it's often very difficult to get behind the front door. Especially the most vulnerable households are very difficult. And well, our approach has always been try to get into a conversation, help people immediately, for instance, with reflective foils, with restoring the cracks in the windows. And when with local communities you work together, you've restored trust. Usually it's not government officials that do the best, but more sort of public-private kind of cooperation structures. Then you can also help them and get them to the more advanced solutions and tell them, hey, here's this solution, you have a smart meter, this is how you can control your energy. Let me help you set it up in a manner that you lower your electricity bill. So it's really this kind of combination of digital insights from the data, digital solutions also for households, and personal contact with people that help to use the digital tools. That's like what works best in our case.
Yeah, interesting. So Mary, we're generally speaking a policy community that we're trying to find out what governments can do in particular. Of course, with the support of the rest of the kind of stakeholder group that we need to engage with. But if you had one thing that you could ask governments to do to make sure that the tools and techniques that you're starting to use at scale are available to all, what would you ask of government?
I have a few answers to that, but I think
a polite one, please.
I'll pick one. I think the biggest one, and you just touched on this, is there are challenges with access to data and privacy and outbound communication in many nations. And so one of the things that we've been able to do for our programs in the United States is a utility has an authority that's oversimplified to say a primary purpose use of data and communication to their customers. And so one of the things that O-Power pioneered is these programs are not opt-in. They're not looking for consumers to raise their hand and say, I need help, what can you do for me? The approach is an opt-out one. And there are barriers to having opt-out, personalized communication. You can tell, the utility can tell with data and technology, household A is very likely highly vulnerable, very likely eligible for a program. And there are barriers to the utility or the ministry, whichever one, to proactively text, call, email that household and say, this is what we think is happening, and here are some things you can do about it. I think that's a pretty significant barrier in a number of countries. I think the EU has done such an incredible job protecting PII and how people are communicated with, but it does create a barrier in this kind of circumstance to actually reach people where they are.
So
I don't know who's going to solve that.
yeah,
but,
I was going to ask you for the solution actually. So, do you have an idea of what best practice looks like in terms of protecting personal data and information, and yet making it available to those who can do good with it?
Yeah, and I actually think the example in the Netherlands is probably a very strong one of how you protect data, but in the United States, utility, the energy supplier relationship is regulated on the subnational U.S. state level. And there are very strong regulations around how that data can be used and what the utility uses it for. And it's not to sell something, it's not to convince somebody to purchase solar rooftop. It is a very specific purpose, and I think, you can see from my title, I come from the regulatory background. And so my tendency is to say, you regulate it, and you find a way to ensure that the entity that has the data, access to the data, and the entity that has the customer relationship. So that's why I keep going back to the utility, that they have the regulatory framework that protects the customer data and ensures you're only using it to the benefit of the customer and not the supplier or a third party. So whenever we do these programs, it's not Oracle or O-Power. It is on behalf of the utility energy supplier and through all of the regulatory frameworks and structures that protect the data and the customer. So I'd be happy if you want to follow up after to sort of see how that looks in practice, where we have been able to do that. I'm happy to do that.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go back to Christine, if I may, because my observation in this part of the world is that some of the emerging and developing economies that we work with are more prepared to take a risk when it comes to trying new things.
Absolutely.
They don't have procedures that are cast in stone and inflexible. And we're seeing huge leaps and bounds happening in terms of use of digital techniques and technologies in some of the big emerging economies. What do you think they have to teach the rest of us?
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening to the discussion, I was actually thinking about just sort of the variability of global context, right? In the sense that there really is quite a wide variety of ways governments relate to these issues of data privacy, and even who has the sort of regulatory authority and the role of utilities and all of this for energy efficiency. It's handled quite differently in different parts of the world. And I'm actually struck, I noted that I came into this space actually working on helping consumers to make good choices, energy efficient choices. I ended up on the regulatory side because it felt too slow. And so going one customer at a time and, attaching information to behavior change, which the research shows is not so straightforward, Yeah, I'm a very restless person, so, the idea that you could actually just set a threshold, right? And say, actually, we're going to take that choice. We're going to, as a government, say everyone deserves the protection of an air conditioner consuming only X, right? But what I find really interesting about these digital technologies and where we are in time and space is that actually you can find the need for speed, right? because you can actually target who actually needs it and identify subgroups and populations where there is vulnerability and there is exposure. That, to me, government has its job to support, protect, empower its most vulnerable citizens and its citizens at large. And so I think in a lot of places you would find appetite for government to take on. I'm thinking of, again, I've been in Barbados recently for an event there, and thinking about what I observed from just the connection of community there, and the nature of how everything is coming from imported fossil fuels, and you really feel that when you're on the island. Just to be clear, I bet your government would have a little bit more appetite for risk, and frankly, the relationships and the trust. Actually, with its citizenry about that. And so I think the digital tools offer a moment, and in other parts of the world, in emerging and developing economies, I think there is an appetite for risk. And I would encourage exploration and partnerships. I hadn't really thought of it, to be honest, and before I was sitting, and it's a little bit, back to the beginning for me. But I wonder, in the conversations that we had with our government partners, if there wouldn't be appetite. Consumer information campaigns can be so costly, right?
Yes.
And it's so hard to get metrics of impact.
Yes.
Right? It's very hard to get attribution of what did we achieve. To me, this is a way to actually get very concrete, right? In the same way that you would for a replacement program or a switch out program, that we achieved X, Y, or Z for these communities in these ways. And so it seems like an area of fertile experimentation, and I definitely think there are governments out there with appetite for that risk.
I think that's actually a great place to stop, because I think we've just started to design a project.
We did.
We did, in fact.
And I'd like to see us, put this on paper and come up with a concept and see what we can do with it, because there's got to be something in this that we can use to scale the opportunity we all know is there, to make sure that it's equitable, to make sure we have the metrics so that we can prove that we've been effective, or where we have and where we can make changes. So it looks like there's a half-baked cake there. We just need to refine the recipe a bit, and I'd be very keen to talk to the panel about how we can do that. In the interest of time, because we started late, I will stop there, and I would like to thank you all for your contributions. I've really enjoyed this, and I think, I think we can take this somewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think they'd like a picture of the panel, if you wouldn't mind.
I wonder if I'm allowed to put it there.